I am Emma Collins, 32, Creative Director at Brightwave Agency, a boutique advertising firm pulling in just over $3 million in annual revenue. This morning I settled into my corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and poured myself a tall iced latte. My inbox pinged with an email from legal, subject line, urgent liability assessment. Heart pounding, I clicked it open. The attached PDF glaringly displayed an estimated damage figure of $250,000, in bold red type, annotated including all legal fees and contract violation penalties. For a moment I felt the room spin. The polished mahogany desk beneath my trembling hands might as well have been a Plinko machine, ready to dump me into an abyss. Just 2 weeks ago, I had secured a $200 campaign commitment from our flagship client, convinced it would more than cover any shortfall. Now, every late-night brainstorming session, every pitched storyboard felt wasted, swept away by a single dispassionate number. And then I scrolled to the very bottom, where a tiny footnote froze me cold. Please confirm whether Emma Collins was directly involved in client negotiations. Was I, the agency's face and voice, about to be branded the architect of this disaster? I'll never forget the first day we all piled into my parents' 2-car garage, elbow to elbow, swapping sneakers for laptops and cluttering the concrete floor with sleeping bags. It was early spring, 2017, and I was 28, fresh off a junior copywriting gig at a mid-size ad shop, brimming with ideas but broke enough that my emergency fund was exactly zero. My brother Ethan, 2 years my senior, had already climbed to a senior engineer role at a Silicon Valley data manufacturing firm. My younger sister Chloe, at 25, was wrapping up her MBA, and our baby brother Jack, at 22, was a computer science prodigy freshly graduated with honors. When Mom came down with Dunkin' iced coffees and Dad hauled in 2 folding tables from the basement, we all knew we were about to light the fuse on something big. LearnBoost, our family-founded edtech startup. We believed in LearnBoost with almost reckless abandon. The concept was simple, an AI-driven study coach that adapted to each student's learning style, with real-time metrics tracking performance and personalized content recommendations. Our parents had scrimped together $50,000, 0 cents in seed capital. Mom liquidated some retirement savings and Dad took out a home equity line. Ethan contributed $20,000, 0 cents from his bonus. Chloe chipped in $10,000, 0 cents she'd saved from internships, and Jack did backflips in celebration of his first $5,000, 0 cents tuition refund from academic contests. I added my $5,000, 0 cents in rent refunds earned by working weekend shifts at a diner. Altogether, we had $1,200,000, 0 cents in angel and pre-seed funding thanks to a local investors club run by Mom's college roommate Lisa Harding and Dad's old fraternity brother Frank Wynn. In those early weeks, the garage was our world. We worked shoulder to shoulder. Ethan architected the back-end algorithms. Chloe handled spreadsheets and cash flow projections down to the penny. Her fiscal fanatical spreadsheets would color code every line, with green for revenue and stark red for burn rate. Jack wrote the front-end code that transformed raw AI outputs into the sleek, student-friendly dashboard you see today. And I, that perpetual dreamer, crafted the brand voice, sloganeering, "Learn at your pace, outperform your race," while sketching low-fidelity wireframes on the whiteboard door. Our parents hovered at the perimeter. Mom in her powder blue cardigan was our unpaid HR manager, mediating impromptu spats. "Ethan, you can't just push a code update at midnight," ferrying snacks, a rotating menu of turkey sandwiches and homemade lemonade, and cheering us on when we submitted our first pitch deck to angel investors. Dad, in his worn Levi's and a Tigers baseball cap, ambled in and out, chuckling at our jargon-filled debates about data normalization and beta testing cohorts. We lived on ramen, gas station energy drinks, and the adrenaline rush of possibility. Weekdays blurred into weekends. We slept on yoga mats and showered at a nearby gym. The total burn rate was roughly $30,000, 0 cents, a month, inclusive of server costs, licenses for data annotation tools, and a part-time freelance illustrator. We paid $1,200 monthly to design our mascot, an owl wearing graduation tassels. Each time we hit a development milestone, we rewarded ourselves. A pizza with extra pepperoni, splitting the $20.00 pie 4 ways, laughing because it tasted like Michelin star, even though we ate it sitting on cardboard boxes. Our warmest memory is the night of our first pilot launch in late August. We had tapped 50 high school students at Westbrook Academy for a 2-week trial. Chloe mailed out printed invitations, clutching her laptop like a mail clerk, while Jack and Ethan debugged on hot coffee and cold wings. I stood in the school's computer lab, my heart fluttering so hard I thought it might flutter out of my chest as the students logged in and started taking quizzes that adapted and reshuffled in real time. We huddled behind a partition, watching their progress graphs tick upward, 70% accuracy on the first set, climbing to 85% by day 7. The lead teacher, Ms. Reynolds, pinged me on Slack. "These insights are gold. My students are engaged like never before." And in that moment, every sleepless night, every shredded prototype, every empty promise to Mom that we almost had it, it all crystallized into electric pride. That pilot success fueled our first outside investment round, $750,000, 0 cents from New Horizons Ventures, a boutique VC run by Marisol Vega, and another $450,000, 0 cents from Digital Futures Fund. Suddenly we rented office space in downtown Oakland, a polished loft with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, enough desks for a dozen employees, and a ping-pong table that became our stress relief ritual. Life felt surreal, a whiteboard full of roadmaps, a Slack channel buzzing 24/7, and a monthly recurring revenue, MRR, climbing from $5,000 0 cents to $25,000 0 cents in 3 months. Through it all, our bond felt unbreakable. Ethan and I co-hosted midnight brainstorm sessions armed with Post-its and Red Bull. Chloe serenaded us with impromptu pep talks whenever anxiety struck. "Emma, you're the visionary. Don't let data drown your creativity." Jack taught me to write basic Python scripts so I could push minor updates myself, cackling when I proudly committed hotfix_final_final pie to GitHub. Even our little nightly rituals, ordering avocado toast platters for delivery at 2 a.m., splitting the bill 4 ways at about $60, 0 cents each, felt like rites of passage. We were a family on a mission, fueled by relentless optimism and that cozy sense that, together, we could do anything. And yet, beneath that warm camaraderie, a fragile thread of competition ran through each of us. Ethan measured his worth by server uptime and latency benchmarks. Chloe ranked herself by fundraising milestones. Jack counted code merges like currency, and I, forever chasing the next great narrative, chased validations in client testimonials and media shoutouts. None of us admitted it aloud, but each win or praise stung a little more if it didn't land squarely on our own plate. When we toasted our $1 million 0 cents ARR, annual recurring revenue, at a rooftop bar last spring, the champagne flowed freely, but I glimpsed Chloe's eyes flicker toward Ethan's congratulatory smile, as if wishing someone else had delivered that line chart. Still, nothing felt amiss. We were champions of the same cause. At summer barbecues in my parents' backyard, we compared notes on user engagement stats under string lights and cicada hums, secure in the belief that our shared dream eclipsed any personal ambition. My proudest brag was that LearnBoost had reduced dropout rates in partner schools by an average of 22% and boosted students' quiz scores by 18 points on standardized tests. Metrics Chloe had calculated to 2 decimal places, just for effect. Ethan loved to recount the server hiccup saga, where he had rerouted traffic in under 3 minutes, saving us from what might have been a disastrous public outage. Jack proudly pointed out the Night Owl feature he'd coded that allowed students to study in low-light mode without straining their eyes. And I, the storyteller, collected all these threads into pitches that painted LearnBoost as the future of personalized learning. That sense of family unity, so warm and unwavering, became the bedrock of our identity. We believed we were impermeable to the outside world's cynicism. If someone doubted us, we had each other. If clients balked at pricing, $500, 0 cents per seat for annual licenses, a steep rate for underfunded schools. We drafted payment plans or offered sliding scales. Every challenge was met with, "We'll figure it out." Every setback was a learning opportunity. We had a culture deck painted on the wall. Empathy, innovation, accountability, family. What none of us acknowledged, though, was how high the stakes had quietly climbed. After 5 years of compound growth, LearnBoost was now on track for $4 million, 0 cents in ARR, negotiating a $20 million 0 cents Series A led by Titan Equity. That deal would come with board seats for Chloe and Ethan, a 3-year vesting schedule for Jack, and a performance bonus for me if we hit a 40% net promoter score threshold. On the surface, these incentives aligned perfectly, but underneath, I remember the first time Ethan mentioned in passing that board meetings are like shark tanks, or when Chloe casually remarked one afternoon, "It'd be great if we all had equal voting rights, don't you think?" I laughed it off then. At the time, wanting a fair say felt innocuous. After all, we were family. So, when the Series A term sheet landed on my desk, complete with a clause that required unanimous consent for any spending above $100,000, 0 cents, and a hidden provision allowing equity reallocation upon material breach of fiduciary duty, I didn't see it as ominous. I saw it as a formality. I signed with a flourish, hugged my siblings tight, and posted the celebratory photo on LinkedIn with the caption, "To the next chapter of LearnBoost family." That night, we toasted with rosé on the rooftop deck, laughter echoing against the city skyline. Looking back now, I realize how that moment planted the seed of our undoing. We believed our shared history, those cozy garage days, the buzz of our first office, the thrill of pilot wins, was indestructible. We never imagined that the same documents we drafted in good faith could later be turned into weapons. We never thought that family bonds could be overshadowed by cap tables, board votes, and hidden legalese. In our drive to build something great, we overlooked the possibility that family might not be enough to safeguard what we had created. Yet in that spring of 2022, there was only warmth, there was only trust, there was only the glow of ambition shared between siblings who had, against all odds, taken a $500,000 gamble on each other. And with that memory still vivid in my mind, I find myself asking, how did we go from those fond, laughter-filled nights to questioning every email, every meeting invite, every whispered conversation? That story, of how a single clause can shatter a decade of goodwill, is what I'm about to unravel next. I first sensed that something was off late one Wednesday afternoon. I'd just returned from a strategy session with our biggest pilot school, clutching my still-warm latte, when my phone buzzed with a notification from our shared executive Gmail account. Chloe's avatar blinked in the corner of the screen as she hit Select All, and then tapped the trash icon. An email vanished. My chest tightened. Chloe, who normally treated every message like sacred scripture, had just deleted one of our most important threads. My detailed summary of LearnBoost's Q2 retention figures, complete with colorful charts showing a 28% month-over-month improvement. I leaned forward, staring at the empty inbox, heart pounding in time with that ominous ding echoing in my ears. Chloe wouldn't do this without a reason, I muttered to myself. But in that moment a memory flickered to life. 6 months earlier, I'd caught her slipping a miniature voice recorder into her purse after one of our late-night pitch rehearsals. She'd promised it was so she could review my delivery style, but I'd never seen her play back a single clip. I'd let it go at the time. After all, who was I to deny her a little constructive feedback? Yet now, as the deletion animation faded, I realized that Recorder might have been capturing more than just my stumbles and ums. I closed the browser tab, but the unease refused to let me. A bead of cold sweat trickled down my temple. My rational mind argued, surely Chloe had simply cleaned up an old thread she thought was spam. But the instinct in my gut whispered otherwise. Something wasn't right. I slipped over to Jack's makeshift desk, where he was debugging the newest release, and tapped him on the shoulder. His headphones slipped down and he looked up, bleary-eyed from too many 3M coding sprints. "Did you see Chloe just nuked a whole email chain from our exec inbox?" I asked quietly. He frowned. "The one with your retention report?" "Weird. She usually flags those for follow-up." Jack's brows knit together. "I'll check the email trash, see if it's recoverable." He clicked through Gmail's bin folder and, sure enough, the thread was sitting there, marked, "Deleted by Chloe." 2:17 p.m., I retrieved it and skimmed through. My report, Chloe's approving comment about the new UI tweak, and then a few lines I didn't recognize. In a forwarded message I hadn't written, someone had proposed sharing our core student data algorithm with a third-party partner for a one-time fee of $150,000, 0 cents. My pulse spiked. This was news to me, and not the kind that merited a blind eye deletion. For the rest of that afternoon I wrestled with doubt. I paced the polished hardwood floor of our Oakland loft, running scenarios. Maybe Chloe was desperate to meet cash flow projections and thought it harmless. Perhaps Ethan had asked her to clean up the inbox ahead of tomorrow's board meeting. Or worst of all, maybe it was her own side deal, unapproved and under the table. Each theory felt darker than the last. I recalled another subtle red flag. Last month, Chloe had asked me to sign an NDA drafted in her name alone. "Just a routine formality," she'd said. I'd scanned it quickly, then shoved it into my folder without a second thought. Nothing about that form seemed routine in hindsight. As dusk settled and the streetlights flickered on outside, my scattered thoughts coalesced into resolve. I needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence. Before I could confront her, I logged into our shared Slack channel and pulled up our archived voice notes. Sure enough, buried under mundane team updates was the familiar hiss of my voice from that late-night pitch rehearsal. And, faintly underneath, Chloe's excited commentary. "Perfect, now let's tweak the clause. You, gotta delete that mention. Nobody needs to see this draft." Her tone was agitated, hurried, as though she feared being overheard. My hands shook as I replayed the clip. The implication was unmistakable. Chloe had been tampering with official documents and discussions without my knowledge. Betrayal hung in the air like a storm cloud. That night, I lay awake in the extra guest room, turned Airbnb office space, staring at the ceiling fan's shadow. The room felt colder than usual. I ran through every interaction I'd had with Chloe over the past quarter, searching for more signs I'd missed. Her sudden insistence on confidential one-on-ones, her whispered phone calls behind the conference room door, the way her smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes. By 3 a.m. exhaustion overtook me, but the tension in my chest lingered. I closed my eyes and silently vowed to get to the bottom of this. If Chloe truly had forged ahead on a $150,000 side deal, or worse, compromised LearnBooth's proprietary algorithm, I would need every scrap of evidence to expose her. No more assumptions, no more smooth explanations. Because in the world we'd built, from sleeping on yoga mats in a garage to negotiating a $20 million 0-cent Series A, there was no room for second-guessing. And if someone close to me was quietly rewriting the rules, I would not rest until I saw the final draft. I still remembered the fluorescent glare of the conference room lights that morning, how they bounced off the polished oak table and caught in my eyes like a warning. Our quarterly board meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. sharp. Ethan, Chloe, Jack, and our 3 outside directors all sitting around me, each with a steaming mug of coffee and a stack of folders stamped confidential. I felt a tight knot in my stomach as I settled into my chair at the head of the table. This was my domain. I'd prepared every slide, rehearsed every answer, and even planned a light-hearted icebreaker. But nothing had prepared me for what was about to unfold. The meeting kicked off normally enough. Our outside director Marisol Vega congratulated us on the 42% revenue uptick this quarter. I beamed, sipping my latte and letting a flicker of pride warm me. Until Chloe slid a manila envelope across the table toward me. "You should see these," she said, voice clipped. Her eyes were cold, unreadable. My pulse hit 140 beats per minute. I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of an $8,500.00 invoice from a private investigations firm, itemized with descriptions like executive monitoring, data access oversight, and a line that made my blood run cold. Emma Collins, behavioral analysis. Underneath, a second document, a draft contract unsigned, proposed licensing LearnBoost's proprietary learning style algorithm to a third party for a one-time fee of $150,000.00. Neither I nor Jack had ever authorized this. Chloe, I said, keeping my voice steady, why am I seeing these now? She met my gaze squarely, exhaling like she'd been waiting for a cue. I thought you should know what's been happening behind your back, she said. We needed to protect the company. You've been distracted lately. Her words landed like stiletto heels. I blinked, trying to make sense of the accusation. Ethan leaned forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. We discovered these documents 2 weeks ago, he said, scanning the room. Obviously, Emma never approved them. We had to intervene. His tone was clinical, as though he were explaining a minor bookkeeping error. But I felt the room constrict around me, as though the walls themselves were accusing me of negligence. My head swam. Intervene how? I managed. Jack, normally the gentle one, folded his arms. We reallocated some of your voting shares, temporarily, not to penalize you, but to ensure no single stakeholder could author these kinds of unilateral deals again. He tapped a second envelope toward me. Inside was a board resolution. Effective immediately, my voting power was reduced from 51% to 24%, with the remaining shares divided among the 4 of them. The document referenced a clause in our Series A agreement permitting equity redistribution upon material breach of fiduciary duty. I felt tears sting the back of my eyes. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. You're diluting my stake because you think I breached fiduciary duty? My voice cracked. The stark reality of betrayal slammed into me harder than any financial loss could have. Chloe's lips curved into something like pity. You were the face of the company, she said, but you've been AWOL. Cancelled meetings, missed investor calls. We couldn't risk further damage. Her words dripped with justification. We did this for the company. Marisol Vega cleared her throat. Technically, Emma did miss 4 board meetings this quarter, and the recorded call transcripts show her distracted, lapse in judgment perhaps. She tilted her head toward the door. We also have a legal opinion from Carter and Smith that supports our interpretation of Clause 9.2. My vision blurred. I saw fragments, the echo of Marisol's voice, the innocuous faces of our directors, the legal memo's header. And then I remembered my late-night conversation with Rachel, my attorney. No board can strip founder control without explicit notice and chance to cure, she had said. The room felt unreal, as though I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. Summoning every ounce of composure, I cleared my throat. I was never notified of any material breach or given an opportunity to respond, I said, voice low but firm. I slid my phone across the table. The display showed a time-stamped email I had sent yesterday at 8:02 a.m. to the board, requesting agenda for today's meeting. Please include any items requiring pre-meeting review. That email had gone unchecked, something I now realized was no accident. Chloe's face flickered. Ethan looked away. Jack's jaw tightened. Marisol frowned. A heavy silence settled. I took a breath. This reallocation is invalid unless proper notice was served per Section 3.4 of our charter, I said, watching them shift uncomfortably. But more to the point, I continued, letting my voice rise. You coordinated with an outside firm to monitor my activities. You deleted my emails to conceal contract drafts. You voted to dilute my majority equity, all without my knowledge. That's not protection. That's a coup. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I have the original Gmail metadata logs showing Chloe's deletions, Jeremy's email to the investigations firm, and the full unredacted drafts of the licensing proposal, I said, clicking to project them onto the screen. The email headers, the timestamps, and the legal correspondence lay bare their conspiracy. Heads snapped up. The room crackled with tension. I pressed play on the recording I'd secretly captured last week. Chloe's own voice describing the cleanup operation, and Ethan's acknowledging the plan to reduce my shares. Their expressions drained as they heard themselves plotting. I stood up, heart-pounding, voice steady. "This ends now," I said. "I'm reinstating my voting rights immediately, and I'm calling an emergency shareholder vote, without you three. If necessary, I'll involve the SEC for breach of fiduciary duty, and I'll go public." My pulse roared in my ears. Silence reigned. Then Marisol Vega cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should take a 5-minute recess," she suggested, eyes flicking from me to Chloe. As the room emptied, I felt a surge of triumph mixed with a hollow ache. The betrayal had cut deeper than I ever imagined, but now the truth was out. The next steps, the negotiations, the fallout, it all lay ahead. But in that charged moment, I reclaimed my power, because in the world of startups, and even more so in the tangled web of family, betrayal tastes bitter, yet exposing it for once tasted like victory. I slid onto my usual cafe stool and ordered black coffee, no warmth in my chest to savor it. When the barista set the cup before me, I stared blankly at the dark liquid as if it held the answer I needed. On the table lay yesterday's board resolution. Dilution effective immediately, stamped in glaring red. The LearnBoost license agreement read, "Cancelled under founder's authority withdrawn." My hands trembled around the mug. A single sip burned my throat, matching the ache in my heart. How had I gone from triumphant pitch decks to this, void of disbelief? I closed my eyes, willing the world to slow. A notification buzzed. "Chloe, can we talk?" No plea, no remorse, just 3 words that felt like a blade. I watched the text hover on my screen, unwilling to open it. The cafe's hum faded. My mind replayed the boardroom visuals. Envelopes slid across the table, heads nodding in concert, my steak sliced away without warning. Each memory was a fresh cut. I stood abruptly, leaving half my coffee behind. Rain began to tap against the window, as if mourning with me. Outside, the city moved on. Cars streaked past. Umbrellas bloomed like flowers in the drizzle. While I stood rooted in shock, back at my apartment I sank onto the couch, coffee still untouched. I closed my eyes against the sting of tears. Questions spun through me. Why didn't they warn me? How could I have missed the warning signs? The silence pressed in until I could almost hear my own heartbeat. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over Chloe's message again. But I couldn't bring myself to reply. In that heavy quiet, I realized I'd been operating on autopilot, trusting titles, family ties, assumptions. Now those assumptions lay shattered. I wrapped my arms around myself, the apartment's emptiness echoing my isolation. Later, I found an unmarked envelope tucked behind a stack of paperwork. Inside, a note in familiar handwriting. "Meet me where our story began." Something stirred at those words, a flicker of resolve. My chest still ached, but for the first time since the meeting I felt the first spark of what might come next. Betrayed, yes, but not broken. And somewhere in that note lay the promise of answers. I woke before dawn the morning after I found the mysterious note. My body still ached from yesterday's emotional onslaught, but something crackled beneath that exhaustion, an ember of determination I hadn't felt since the boardroom coup. I sat up in bed, phone in hand, staring at the message. "Meet me where our story began." I slipped on a sweater, grabbed my keys and drove 30 minutes out of the city back to my parents' house in the suburbs, the place where Ethan, Chloe, Jack, and I had built LearnBoost in a dusty garage. The gate was unlocked, the driveway strewn with dandelions. I paused at the threshold, heart thudding, and stepped inside. The garage smelled the same, a faint musk of engine oil, old cardboard boxes, and the sharp tang of forgotten takeout containers. My eyes found the whiteboard door, where the first scrawled slogan still lingered in faded blue marker. "Learn at your pace, outperform your race." I ran my fingertips over the dry erase smudges, remembering how we'd argued over that line late into the night. Footsteps behind me made me spin around. Rachel DeMarco, my corporate attorney, and the R from the note, stepped into the half-light, briefcase in hand. Her tailored blazer looked out of place among the dusty paint cans and folding chairs. She gave me a small, encouraging smile. "Emma," she said softly, "you're going to want to see this." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a slim manila folder. Inside were printed bank statements, email headers, and a forensic report from CyberTrace Analytics, an external firm she'd secretly commissioned. My pulse ratcheted up as I flipped through pages stamped with timestamps, IP logs, and metadata trails. Chloe's email deletion was carried out from a computer registered to the office, Rachel explained. But look here, she tapped a highlighted line. At 2:15 p.m. on June 10th, someone remotely accessed the account using our server's administrative credentials. That wasn't Chloe, it was Ethan. My breath caught. Ethan, my brother, the one I'd trusted to maintain our infrastructure, was implicated as well. I looked up at Rachel, speechless. "And there's more," she continued. She slid over a printed Slack transcript. It showed a private channel, Family Confidential, where the four of them had outlined their plan to dilute my shares. Next to Chloe's message about the private investigations invoice, Ethan had written, "I'll run the dilution through legal tomorrow morning. Jack, you handle the algorithm clause." I sank against a workbench, the wood rasping through my shirt. Betrayal had metastasized beyond Chloe. This was a coordinated family conspiracy. My vision blurred, but the ember inside me flared into a shaft of light. Rachel closed the folder gently. "Here's where we pivot," she said. "We file an emergency injunction to pause any board actions, we notify our primary investors of the misconduct, and we prepare a counter-proposal that puts you back in control." I nodded, adrenaline surging. "What do I need to do?" "First," she said, "we compile a declaratory judgment, your sworn statement plus all this evidence. Second, we alert New Horizons Ventures and Titan Equity. Their term sheets require them to be notified of any material corporate disputes. If they pull their support or threaten to, that buys us leverage." I took a deep breath, tasting the crisp morning air filtering through the cracked garage door. The ruins of our early dreams surrounded me, but now they felt like a battle map. "Let's move fast," I said. Over the next 2 hours, we worked side by side at an old drafting table. Rachel dictated legal filings while I supplied context and personal declarations. I described the day-to-day changes, the deleted emails, the hushed family meetings, the overt dilution vote, and I signed each affidavit with a bold, determined flourish. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of my agency. By mid-morning, we had an emergency motion drafted and ready. Rachel packed it into her briefcase. "I'll file this in the Alameda County Superior Court today. They should issue a temporary restraining order within 48 hours, freezing your shares and any corporate actions." I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders loosening just slightly. "And our investors?" Rachel smiled. "I scheduled calls with Marisol Vega at New Horizons and with Victor Chen at Titan. I'll present the evidence and emphasize that they risk a PR nightmare if the dispute goes public without their involvement. They'll back you, or at least press the board to negotiate." I felt the gravity of every step, but also a quiet thrill. I was no longer reeling helplessly. I was on offense. That afternoon, I returned to the Oakland loft, my erstwhile kingdom, and sent a succinct email to both investor contacts. Subject: Urgent, confidential board dispute at LearnBoost. Body: Victor, Marisol. I regret to inform you of a covert board action that has stripped my founder voting rights and threatened the company's stability. Attached are documented evidence of unauthorized equity dilution and misappropriation of proprietary assets. I request an immediate conference call to discuss a corrective path forward. Emma. As I hit send, I felt a pulse of clarity. The weight of shock and betrayal was turning into purposeful energy. By evening, Rachel's calls bore fruit. New Horizons Ventures paused their disbursement of the final $2 million 0 cents tranche of the Series A, pending investigation. Titan Equity threatened to withdraw entirely unless the board reinstated my rights. Zoe Williams from New Horizons called me directly, her voice firm. Emma, you have our full support. We won't let a family dispute derail this, especially not when the evidence is this clear. In the quiet hours after those calls, I sat at my dining room table, lit only by a single lamp. My phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from Chloe, Ethan, Jack, each pleading and apologizing in turn. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a fresh document and began drafting a revised governance structure, clear voting thresholds, an independent board chairman, transparent protocols for contract approvals, and an arbitration clause for family disputes. By midnight, I had a draft ready to share. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. The ache in my chest hadn't vanished, but it was tempered by a sense of momentum. I wasn't just fighting to undo their betrayal. I was building safeguards to prevent it ever happening again. As I turned off the lamp and prepared for a few hours of sleep, I realized I'd crossed a threshold. I'd gone from stunned victim to strategic leader. Tomorrow the court would decide whether to freeze the board's actions. Tomorrow the investors would decide whether to side with me. But in that garage where it all began, I'd found my spark. A knowing that, no matter how personal the fight, I was no longer alone and no longer powerless. I drifted off with Rachel's folder clutched to my chest and a single thought burning bright. I am Emma Collins, and I will reclaim my company. That morning, the email arrived. The court had granted my emergency motion, issuing a temporary restraining order that froze any further board actions. Relief washed over me like a tide, but I knew the real work was just beginning. By mid-morning, I was back in the Oakland loft, where LearnBoost's pulse once beat strongest, and on speakerphone, Marisol Vega from New Horizons Ventures and Victor Chen from Titan Equity laid out their terms. They would withhold the remaining $2 million, 0 cents of our Series A until a governance framework was put in place to prevent another clandestine power grab. Their support shifted the momentum. I was no longer merely defending my stake but preparing to redefine how everything would operate going forward. I sent a succinct calendar invite to Ethan, Chloe, and Jack. 3 p.m., Family Summit, 142 Maple Drive, Garage. Please come prepared with any proposals. Council and investors will attend. I chose the old garage intentionally, the crucible where our shared dreams had been forged. When I arrived, I found folding chairs in a semicircle and name tags laid out alongside bottled water. My 3 siblings appeared next. Ethan's expression was guarded. Chloe's eyes narrowed behind a mask of composure, and Jack trailed nervously behind them. As we stood under the single overhead lamp, I laid out the documents, the restraining order, investor statements of support, and the forensic reports Rachel had unearthed. I spoke calmly but firmly, summarizing how each secret deletion, each back-channel meeting, and each unauthorized vote had come to light, and how the court and our primary backers now insisted on ironclad safeguards. Next, I presented my proposed governance charter, a 5-seat board with 2 founders, 2 investor representatives, and an independent chair, supermajority thresholds for any contract above $50,000, 0 cents, mandatory quarterly third-party audits of all administrative systems, and a binding arbitration clause to resolve intra-fender disputes. I watched as Chloe's jaw clenched, Ethan's fingers drummed the table, and Jack's shoulders slumped. Then I shifted, sliding over the severance and transition proposal, a one-time payout of approximately $1,400,000, 0 cents each, a 6-month $150,000, 0 cents consultancy contract for knowledge transfer, and non-disparagement and non-compete clauses tailored to protect LearnBoost's mission. I told them plainly, you have 2 paths. Stay under these transparent terms or exit with dignity and fair compensation. If neither path is chosen, we default to the court's parameters and prolong costly litigation. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, Chloe stood, voice wavering. Is this an ultimatum? I shook my head, meeting her gaze. It's a choice, your chance to decide how you want this story to go forward. Ethan exhaled and glanced at our parents' whiteboard slogan still scrawled on the door. Learn at your pace, outperform your race. Finally, he nodded, and Jack managed a quiet, I'm in. Chloe's shoulders sagged, she drew in a breath and said, We'll stay. Under your term. Relief bloomed in my chest as Rachel passed around the pens. One by one they signed. First Chloe, then Ethan, then Jack, then I, followed by Marisol, Victor, and Rachel as witness. As the papers settled on the table, a hush fell over us. Chloe's voice cracked as she said, "I'm sorry it had to come to this." I reached out to squeeze her hand, the weight of that apology heavier, but healing. Ethan and Jack offered tentative smiles. Marisol closed her binder with a snap and declared, "Congratulations. This framework will carry LearnBoost to $10 million 0 cents ARR and beyond." Victor added, "Your leadership today proves to us you're capable of steering through any storm." Packing up the folding chairs, I looked around the garage. Dust motes dancing in the late afternoon light, and felt a quiet pride. We had stared down betrayal, harnessed investor pressure, and transformed crisis into a renewed covenant of trust. Driving back into the city, I realized that turning the tables wasn't simply about reclaiming control. It was about rewriting the rules so that every voice was heard, every action was transparent, and every future decision would be built on the hard lessons of this moment. I still think back to that rainy afternoon last year when Maya Thompson showed up at my doorstep with 2 slices of lemon drizzle cake and a battered copy of Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. Maya had been my college roommate, my unofficial hype woman, the only person who ever told me I could channel my anxiety into creative sparks rather than perfectionist paralysis. That day I was halfway through drafting our Series A deck, knots in my stomach, blinking at spreadsheets and slide templates, convinced our projections weren't bold enough. Maya flopped onto my couch, set the cake down and said, "Emma, you're leading with numbers, not stories. Investors want to back people, not pie charts." She handed me Sinek's book, open to a dog-eared page. "Great leaders prioritize the well-being of those they serve. When people feel safe, they'll follow you into the unknown." I laughed, sugar from the cake crusting on my fingers. "But I need to prove our growth metrics." She shook her head. "You prove growth by building trust. Tell them why LearnBoost matters, not just how much revenue it'll make." That side story advice planted a seed. In every pitch since then, I always began with a student's face, like Jasmine, who used our adaptive quizzes to ace her college entry exams despite dyslexia, or Marcus, who logged in late at night after his part-time shift, hungry to catch up with his classmates. I'd show their before and after test score graphs, but only after sharing their voices. Fast forward to today, and that same principle guided by recovery from the boardroom coup. When Rachel suggested we draft my sworn declaration for the injunction, I hesitated at the clinical tone of breach of fiduciary duty and unauthorized equity dilution. Then I remembered Maya. Stories build empathy, and empathy motivates action. So instead of a bare legal statement, I began with a vignette. On June 10th, I stood in a brightly lit conference room, waiting to present our retention report, data I'd spent weeks refining. Instead, I was handed an invoice for $8,500, 0 cents, to spy on my every move. That personal touch transformed the narrative. Investors didn't just see a founder's legal grievance. They felt the shock, the disbelief, the human cost of betrayal. Marisol later told me it was that opening story, not the balance sheets, that convinced her to press pause on the funding until we resolved the dispute. Beyond fundraising, I carried Maya's lesson into reshaping LearnBoost's culture. In our new governance charter, I insisted on quarterly Founder Stories sessions, where each executive shares a personal moment that shaped their commitment to our mission. It's equal parts catharsis and reminder. We're not just building software, we're transforming lives. Maya's lemon drizzle wisdom also inspired my thank you ritual. After signing the new governance agreement, I invited Maya back to the garage for her cake, this time hosting a small celebration for the core team. As she bit into the familiar sponge, lighter than ever after a year of practice, she smiled and said, "Looks like your story did the heavy lifting." In that moment, I realized that the bonus insight of any crisis isn't buried in the spreadsheets or legal filings, it's hidden in the human connections we almost forget to honor. Because when trust fractures, it's stories shared vulnerably that mend the cracks. And if there's one lesson I've learned from Maya's side story, it's this. Data can drive decisions, but stories drive hearts. and hearts, once won, will follow you through any storm. I still remember the moment I realized our negotiated exit terms would rip the final scab off the wounds my siblings had inflicted. The day after we signed the new governance charter, I logged into our HR portal to schedule a standard team-wide ethics refresh and found instead a mandatory ethics and compliance training session already on everyone's calendar. The organizer was Dr. Meredith Lang, a renowned business ethics professor I'd never met, and the session description bluntly cited court-mandated remediation for breaches of fiduciary duty. My stomach flipped. This wasn't a gentle nudge toward better behavior. It was the public reckoning we'd agreed upon, played out on a virtual stage. Chloe was first to face the music. I watched her square-shouldered silhouette appear on my laptop screen, eyes red-rimmed and resolute, as Dr. Lang opened with a case study that, thinly veiled, mirrored our family saga. Co-founders turning on the CEO, covert recordings, unauthorized data sales, and a boardroom coup. When the professor paused to ask, "Why is trust the cornerstone of effective leadership?" Chloe's hand trembled as she raised it. "Because without trust, every decision becomes a gamble," she answered, voice wavering yet honest. Over the next 3 days, I tracked her progress through role-playing exercises, rebuilding trust with hypothetical teams, drafting transparent feedback protocols, and composing a 6-page reflection on her own misdeeds. By the final session, Dr. Lang commended her vulnerability and growth, noting that admitting fault is rare but necessary. When word got out, Chloe was invited to guest lecture on corporate ethics at her alma mater, an ironic twist, since she'd once violated every principle she now championed. Ethan's downfall was quieter but no less profound. After signing his severance agreement, he cleared out his desk with a muted dignity, leaving behind engineering journals and a half-assembled server rack. His LinkedIn update? Seeking new challenges in data infrastructure. Felt like an obituary for his LearnBoost tenure. Within weeks, he accepted a $180,000 0 a year role at Apex Analytics in Seattle, bound by a 2-year non-compete that barred him from EdTech. At his new company, he quickly discovered that reputations follow you. Whispered hallway exchanges about the co-founder who tried to dilute his sister's stake shadowed his every move. I met him 9 months later at a San Francisco conference and saw how hard he'd worked to rebuild trust. Late-night hackathons, open-source contributions, volunteer coding sessions at local boot camps. He confessed over coffee, "I lost more than equity. I lost my integrity. Restoring that has been tougher than any server outage." His next publication, a white paper on secure shared governance in distributed systems, was a clear nod to the clauses he once manipulated. Jack's exile unfolded along a different trajectory, one of self-rediscovery. Always our free spirit, he packed a single backpack and flew to Reykjavik, Iceland, chasing tales of coder co-ops beneath the northern lights. His Instagram feed became a journal of aurora-lit lagoons, geothermal hackathons in glass-roofed greenhouses, and midnight sun coding sprints aboard a co-working boat. There he volunteered teaching Python to refugees and contributed his signature focus mode feature, originally built for LearnBoost's low-light dashboard, to an open-source language learning app used by immigrants practicing English under Iceland's perpetual twilight. I'll never forget the email he sent me from a Reykjavik cafe. "Giving back feels better than any paycheck," he wrote, "and for the first time in years, I'm coding with pure joy." In the end, he co-founded Aurora Apps, a non-profit that mentors young coders in remote communities, trading a $1,200,000 0 equity windfall for the chance to rebuild his moral compass. By year's end, our offices felt strangely quieter without my siblings' laughter or their schemes echoing through the halls. Yet, under the stewardship of our new independent board chair, Dr. Sandra Kim, LearnBoost emerged stronger. Our annual recurring revenue climbed past $6 million 0 cents, and a company-weighted trust index survey registered 92% positive feedback, up from 38% just 6 months before. And whenever I crossed paths with Chloe, Ethan, or Jack at industry events or in social media threads, I saw new versions of the people I once knew. Chloe, the ethics consultant with a best-selling guide on corporate integrity, Ethan, the infrastructure thought leader, whose keynote on distributed trust garnered standing ovations. Jack, the Northern Lights coder whose nonprofit partnership programs now spanned 4 continents. Their downfalls had fractured our family and company, but they also set in motion powerful transformations. None of us emerged unscathed. Betrayal and exile left deep scars, but those very crucibles forged new strengths. My siblings traded their Learn Boost stakes for clarity of purpose. Chloe now teaches what she once disregarded. Ethan builds governance frameworks to prevent the abuses he once enabled, and Jack codes for causes that mirror his rediscovered values. As for me, I learned that accountability need not be a bitter end. It can be the prologue to reinvention. And so, when I look back on their exits, I don't see simple defeats. I see the alchemy of consequence, how the fall of each antagonist became the catalyst for their most authentic selves, and for Learn Boost's rebirth on a foundation of trust. When the final echo of signatures faded and the garage lights dimmed, I felt a curious stillness settle over me. Our pivotal showdown, family versus founder, was over, and Learn Boost stood on new ground. Driving home that evening, I replayed every twist: the boardroom coup, the secret audits, the investor interventions, the struggle to reclaim my majority stake. But above all, I held one clear realization: no amount of equity or title can substitute for transparent trust. Over the next week, I stepped back into my role as creative director with renewed purpose. The first change I made was simple but profound. I opened our war room, the glass-walled conference space in our Oakland loft, and pinned every document from the dispute on the bulletin board: email metadata logs, the restraining order, the new governance charter, and even Chloe's ethics training reflection paper. I announced a Truth Week, in which every team member could ask any question, no matter how uncomfortable, and receive an honest answer. On Monday morning, I convened the company over video call. Faces filled the gallery view: product managers, engineers, curriculum designers, and customer success leads. My voice felt steadier than it had in months. "We've been through one of the toughest weeks any startup could face," I began. "But from this crucible, we've forged something stronger than before: a commitment to radical transparency." I clicked through slides showing our new processes: mandatory dual approval for contracts over $50,000, 0 cents, quarterly third-party system audits, and a public board bulletin emailed to all employees after each meeting, summarizing key decisions in plain language. Then I shared the lesson that Maya's lemon-drizzled wisdom taught me. It's not enough to have airtight policies if people don't feel safe speaking up when they see a crack. We must build a culture where honesty is our first filter. I invited our head of HR, Lena, to explain the anonymous voice line channel we'd launched, an encrypted suggestion box for reporting concerns, pledging zero retaliation for any whistleblower. As questions poured in, some hesitant, some skeptical, I answered each one candidly. When an engineer asked about the fear of being tattled on, I acknowledged the discomfort. I know the term whistleblower has negative connotations, but think of it as care blower, people caring enough to point out danger before it becomes disaster. That moment crystallized a shift. We were moving from a culture of quiet assumptions to one of open dialogue. In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes everywhere. Teams began scheduling truth check breaks at the end of sprints, where they'd air minor grievances before they snowballed. Our quarterly all-hands included a lessons learned segment, where founders and executives shared a misstep and what they'd do differently. Chloe, now reinstated as CFO under our revised charter, delivered the first lessons learned talk. She candidly recounted her rationale for deleting that email chain, fearing the company might collapse under missed targets, and apologized for bypassing our core values. Her vulnerability earned her a standing ovation over Zoom. Personally, I found myself more present. I no longer ducked tough conversations or delayed feedback. When a mid-level manager admitted she'd felt sidelined while I was consumed by the board dispute, I thanked her for speaking up and immediately restructured our project lead rotation to ensure diverse voices influenced key decisions. Each time I saw an issue raised and resolved openly, it felt like a small victory against the secrecy that had almost destroyed us. 1 month later, we held our first post-crisis board meeting under the new governance rules. For the first time, our independent chair, Dr. Sandra Kim, led the session. The tone was collaborative. Investors, founders, and executives discussed expansion plans, adding a Spanish language module and piloting LearnBoost in 5 new districts. The meeting minutes, distilled into a 500-word digest, landed in every employee's inbox by dusk. Our Trust Index survey at quarter's end jumped to 96% positive feedback. Beyond LearnBoost's metrics, I learned a deeper personal lesson. Resilience isn't bouncing back to the way things were, but moving forward with greater intentionality. I'd spent years perfecting pitch decks, brand narratives, and adaptive learning algorithms, but I hadn't anticipated the human vulnerabilities lurking beneath titles and blood ties. Facing down my siblings' betrayal forced me to confront not only their shortcomings but my own assumptions, that family equals safety, that loyalty trumps vigilance, that goodwill alone can govern a company. In the quiet moments, walking home after late meetings, gazing at the Oakland skyline from my balcony, I reflected on how crisis had reshaped my leadership. I journaled anew each evening, not with bullet points of deliverables, but with prompts like, "What truth did I discover today?" and "How did I foster trust?" Those pages brimmed with small commitments, calling a colleague to clarify feedback, sharing project delays before deadlines loomed, flagging ambiguous language in contracts, even posting an emoji-laced Slack reminder that transparency is sexy. Today, as I stand at the helm of a company on an upward trajectory, a Roche approaching $8 million, 0 cents user retention at a record 92%, and LearnBoost's reputation stronger than ever, I know our greatest asset isn't a proprietary algorithm or marquee investors. It's the culture we rebuilt from the ruins of betrayal. A culture where truth isn't feared, where voices are heard, and where every agreement, legal or personal, is anchored in shared value. If there's one takeaway I'll carry forward, it's this: accountability begets authenticity, and authenticity begets trust. Policy and process can guard against overt malfeasance, but only genuine transparency can preempt the quiet compromises that corrode teams from within. In our pursuit of growth, we must never neglect the simple power of open conversation and the courage to admit when we're wrong. Because at the end of the day, a company isn't just its balance sheet, it's its people, its stories, and the fragile bonds that hold them together. And I, Emma Collins, have learned that preserving those bonds requires more than leadership. It demands the humility to keep them honest.